Hi students, welcome to my educational channel Rendezvous with Reena. Today we will be doing the first chapter, the last lesson from the book Flamingo. This chapter has been written by Alphonse Daudet. Alphonse Daudet is considered to be one of the most iconic names of the French literature. As a French short story writer and a novelist, he is still remembered chiefly as the author of sentimental tales of the provincial life in the south of France. The Franco-German War, which had a profound effect on his writing, can be judged from the second volume of the short stories named Monday Tales. Alphonse Daudet till date is considered by many literature lovers to be one of the handful writers who portray human emotions in a very realistic manner. Now let's look at the learning objectives of the story. To identify the genre to which the story belongs, to comprehend the cultural background of the story, to realize the importance of a teacher in the life of the student, and learning how patriotism also means love for one's language and other aspects of culture. Let's go through the setting of the story. The story is set in the French districts of Alsace and Lorraine during the days of the Franco-Prussian War between 1870 to 1871. The beautiful backdrop of the woods, filled with the chirping of birds, the river's soar and the fields, offer a stark contrast to the drills of the Prussian soldiers and the political upheaval. Alphonse Daudet has used this canvas to show how the change of power affected the civilians, that is, a particular student called Franz, his French teacher Hamel, and the elders of that village. Now let's go through the brief overview of the chapter. The prose last lesson written by Alphonse Daudet describes the year 1870 when the Prussian forces under Bismarck attacked and captured France. The French districts of Alsace and Lorraine went into Prussian hands. The new Prussian rulers discontinued the teaching of French in the schools of these two districts. The French teachers were asked to leave. The story describes the last day of one such French class under Hamel. Hamel could no longer remain in his old school. He gave his last lesson with utmost devotion. So the story, written in historical background, is a beautiful depiction of the emotional bond of the people with their mother tongue. It depicts the pathos of the situation, that in order to conquer the minds of the people, it is not enough to win the country physically by force. In order to enslave the people completely, the conqueror needs to enslave their thoughts and make them devoid of their mother tongue. So let's begin the story. The narrator of the story is a young school-going boy named Franz. That morning he was in great dread of scolding as he was late for school. Also, as a teacher, Hamel had announced the previous day that he would test them on the topic of participles. And Franz did not know anything at all. He was more scared of being scolded. Now, what do you mean by the phrase in great dread of? That means scared of. Franz had another option in his mind, to miss the school and enjoy the day out in the warm and the bright weather. He describes this scene. There were birds chirping on the trees, and the noise of the Prussian soldiers doing the drill behind the sawmill could also be heard. So what is the meaning of sawmill? A factory for cutting wood, and drilling means exercise. The scene outside was more tempting than the school, but Franz resisted the temptation and chose to attend the school. Tempting means attractive, and resist means to stay away or to control. As Franz walked past the town hall, he noticed a huge crowd at the bulletin board. The war with Prussia had begun 2.5 years ago, and since then, all the bad news like losing the war, occupation of Alsace and Lorraine by the enemy, that is Prussia, etc., had been communicated to the people through this bulletin board. Franz kept on walking towards the school and thought in his mind that what news could have been put up on the bulletin board. So children, bulletin board here refers to a notice board for putting up the latest news and communication. As he walked hurriedly towards the school, the blacksmith who was reading the news and had come along with his apprentice called out to Franz from behind and said that he need not go in such a hurry as there was plenty of time for him to reach school. Franz thought that the blacksmith was making fun of him as he was already late for school. When Franz reached the garden outside the school, he was out of breath as he had walked very fast. And what does apprentice means? A trainee who was being trained under the blacksmith. Franz describes the usual scene at the school in the morning, a great bustle created by the moving of the desks, children repeating their lessons in unison, and the teachers rapping the table with a ruler could be heard. Now, great bustle means a lot of noise created by many people. In unison means at the same time, and rapping here means striking. But that day was an unusual one, as there was no such sound coming out of the school, and it seemed that the school was closed as it used to be on a Sunday morning. Franz had planned that he would count on Commotion and reach the class without being noticed, but that did not seem possible, as Franz wanted to sneak into the class quietly, unnoticed, but it did not happen as the atmosphere of the school was totally different that day. So, what do you think was unusual about the school that day? Well, usually there used to be a great hustle and bustle when the school began. The noise of the desks closing and opening, lessons being repeated in unison filled the atmosphere. But on that day, everything was as quiet as a Sunday morning. Students were already in their places and the usual commotion was missing. So Franz peeped into his class and saw his classmates already seated and Hamel, their teacher, walking in the class with a ruler made of iron placed under his arm. Franz feared a beating. Counted on means depended upon, and commotion means noise and confusion. Franz was ashamed of being late. He blushed and feared a scolding as he had to enter the classroom in front of everyone. Franz blushed because of being late, but nothing happened. And Hamel saw him and said very kindly, "Go to your place quickly, little Franz. We were beginning without you." So Franz found it strange as Hamel did not say anything and on the contrary politely asked him to go to his seat as the class was about to begin without him. I jumped over the bench and sat down at my desk. Not until then, when I had got a little over my fright, did I see that our teacher had on his beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and a little black silk cap, all embroidered, that he never wore except on inspection and prize days. This means that Franz, after having seated and after having overcome the scare, he noticed that the teacher was wearing his best clothes, which he normally wore on inspection and prize days. And what were the clothes that the teacher was wearing? The beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and the little black silk cap all embroidered. Now Franz wondered if that was a normal day, and then what could be the reason for Hamel wearing a special dress? So children, blushed means face turned red in color due to shame. Franz felt that the atmosphere in the school was unusual and solemn. Solemn means serious. To add to it, the last benches of the classroom were occupied by the senior village men. Monsieur was wearing his three-cornered hat, the retired mayor, and the postmaster. They all looked sad. Monsieur had brought an old primer thumbed at the edges. He had opened it and kept it on his knees and placed his spectacles on it. And what is a primer? Primer is a basic reader of any language, and thumbed means torn and damaged. So while I was wondering about it all, Hamel mounted his chair and in the same grave and gentle tone which he had used to me, said, "My children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master comes tomorrow. This is your last French lesson. I want you to be very attentive." Grave means serious. So after listening to Hamel, Franz was confused and could not figure out what was happening that day. And just then Hamel told them that it was their last lesson in French, and as the order had come from Berlin to teach only German in the school, as the German teacher would arrive the next day. And since it was their last lesson in French, so he wanted them to pay attention. What a thunderclap these words were to me. Oh, the wretches! That was what they had put up at the town hall. Thunderclap is used in comparison to refer to something startling or unexpected, and wretches here refers to an unfortunate happening. So what was the unexpected news? That is, the French language will no longer be taught in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine, and it was their last lesson in French. So Franz was shocked to know that he could no longer learn French, and now he knew the latest news that had been put up at the bulletin board of the town hall. My last French lesson. Why, I hardly knew how to write. I should never learn any more. I must stop there then. Oh, how sorry I was for not learning my lessons, for seeking birds' eggs, or going sliding on the Saar. Saar refers to a river which passes through France. Nuisance means a problem, unwanted burden. So Franz regretted for not being serious towards studies and wasting his time by seeking birds' eggs and playing in the river. Till now, Franz considered his books to be a nuisance, but suddenly he starts considering them to be his best friends, whom he could never leave. The writer wants to show the change in Franz's attitude towards studies after hearing the news that he could no longer learn French anymore. The news that the teacher and Hamel was leaving also had a similar impact on him. Franz did not want him to go away. He no longer thought the teacher to be cranky and strict. Now cranky means strange, short-tempered. Poor man, it was in honor of this last lesson that he had put on his fine Sunday clothes. And now I understood why the old men of the village were sitting there in the back of the room. Now Franz knew that Hamel was wearing his best dress in honor of this last lesson. He also realized that the village men who had come to pay respect and thank Hamel for his service of 40 years to that school. Village men had come to the class, as they were also repentant for not having studied in their childhood, and also wanted to show respect to the country, and were sad that the mother tongue French language would no longer be taught to them. While Franz was thinking of all this, he heard his name being called. The teacher called out to Franz as it was his turn to recite the topic of participles. As the news had impacted Franz, he was eager to study, and so he was desperate to show his eagerness. He wanted to be able to recite the topic in one go and without any mistake and please his teacher. His desperation is reflected in his willingness to give away all that he had in return for reciting the lesson. As Franz did not know the lesson, he got mixed up and stood quietly. His heart was beating fast as he was ashamed of himself and did not have the courage to face his teacher. So mixed up means got confused. So why was Franz confused? Because he was not prepared for his lesson, as he always had taken his language for granted. I heard Hamel say to me, "I won't scold you, little Franz. You must feel bad enough. See how it is. Every day we have said to ourselves, 'Bah, I have plenty of time. I'll learn it tomorrow.' And now you see where we have come out." The expression "where we have come out" means result of taking their language for granted, result of running away from their language. Hamel said to Franz that he would not scold him, as he has now realized his mistake. Every day Franz had told himself that he would study the next day, and now the opportunity to study has ended and he knew nothing. That's the great trouble with ALSACE. She puts off learning till tomorrow. Now those fellows out there will have the right to say to you, "How is it you pretend to be Frenchmen and yet you can neither speak nor write your own language?" But you're not the worst, poor little Franz. We have all a great deal to reproach ourselves with. Pretend means show, and to reproach refers to blame. So Hamel here says that all the people of ALSACE were to be blamed, as no one was serious towards learning. He tells the class that the enemies, that is Prussians, would laugh at them and say that they only show to be Frenchmen and they can neither speak nor write their own language. He says that Franz was or should not feel guilty, as everyone is at fault. And I have to be blamed also. Have I not often sent you to water my flowers instead of learning your lessons? And when I wanted to go fishing, did I not give you a holiday? Hamel says that as a teacher, he was also not interested in teaching them, and he would send them to his home to water the plants. And sometimes Hamel would declare a holiday and go for fishing. So this shows that everyone was at fault of running away from their own language. Then, from one thing to another, Hamel went on to talk of the French language and told his class to guard the language and never forget it, because when people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they have the key to the prison. Hamel tells the class to guard their language, as it is the only way to free oneself from the prison of slavery. If a person knows his mother tongue well, no one can enslave him. Language is the tool to fight domination. Thereafter, Hamel took a class in grammar. That day, Franz was surprised that he understood the lesson with ease. He felt that he had been attentive, and that Hamel also explained the lesson with a lot of patience. Franz felt that Hamel wanted to give them all the knowledge he had before leaving and to put it all into their heads at one stroke. The phrase "one stroke" means at once, in one go. After grammar, they had a lesson in writing, and Hamel gave the class new notebooks with Franz ALSACE beautifully written on them. Franz felt that there was an air of patriotism in the class. The notebooks were like flags of France. They were floating all around. The entire class was busy writing, and the only sound that could be heard was that of the pen writing on the paper. There is a text in the chapter where the author has written, "The littlest ones who worked right on tracing their fish hooks as if that was French too." The littlest ones refers to the pigeons here, who worked right on tracing their fish hooks, that is, scratching with their claws. The writer considers the pigeons sitting on the roof of the class to be students as well, and says that even the pigeons were busy scratching the roof with the claws, and it seemed that they were also busy writing the task of French language. On the roof, the pigeons flew very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? Good is the sound made by the pigeons. The cooing of the pigeons on the roof makes Franz wonder whether the Germans will make the bird sing in German as well. The writer wants to say that language comes naturally to human beings, and it cannot be forced upon anyone, be it the pigeon or the Frenchman. When Franz looks up, he sees Hamel scanning the entire class as if to imprint the scene in his memory. The writing lesson is followed by the babies chanting. Even the old hoisier joins their recital with tears in his eyes. The clock strikes 12. Then the Angelus, meaning the prayer song. And after the prayer song, at the same time the Prussian sounds the trumpet, and Hamel freezes. He tries to say something but is overwhelmed with emotions. "My friends," said he, but something choked him. Choke means unable to speak due to strong emotions. He could not go on. He stops and starts scribbling on the blackboard with large letters, "Vive la France," meaning "Long live France." And then he stopped writing, bent towards the wall, and without speaking anything, signals the class to leave, as the class was over. The story demonstrates how the linguistic chauvinism of one race can lead to the enslavement of another, and what we as individuals can do to overcome such a challenge. Themes of war, identity, linguistic chauvinism, uncertainty and displacement are replete in the story. The literary device of contrast is employed at the end of the lesson when the striking of the church clock is followed by the recital of the Angelus, a Catholic prayer. Simultaneously, the Prussians sound their trumpet and the two contrasting words of peace and violence, faith and force meet at a brief moment in time. And it is this moment that the last lesson comes to an end. The last lesson is a story as relatable today as it was when it was written. With the imposition of language in different areas by various regimes, it should be amply clear that the need to learn and respect one's language is of great importance. One should not be as naive as the residents of Alsace as presented in the last lesson and commit the same mistake in the 21st century which they did in the 19th century. So children, we can wind up this lesson by understanding that language is expression of ideas, and if one country cannot preserve an identity of ideas, they cannot retain the identity of language. With this, we come to the end of the chapter. I hope you all understood the chapter well. Thank you.